From the Circular Economy Studio, you're listening to the Don't Call It Sustainable podcast. Join us as we speak with organizations who use the circular economy as a tool to stimulate economic value while also regenerating natural ecosystems. It truly is the best of both worlds. Now here's your host, the co-author of The Circular Economy for Dummies, Kyle J. Ritchie.
How's it going, my friends? Welcome. This is Kyle Ritchie, the author of Circular Economy for Dummies. And on this show, we are going to speak with pros from around the world to figure out exactly how business industries like architecture, fashion, technology can become an asset to the natural world with the use of the circular economy. Specifically, the three principles involved, which are design out waste, circulate products, and regenerate natural systems. Thank you for joining in. Let's get started. So after a lot of thought and considering the name of this show, I thought it would be pretty crucial to start this first episode by addressing the term sustainable. And although sustainability has been seen as a really great thing historically, exploring sustainability helps to identify how the circular economy is actually better than sustainable. And although I support the idea behind sustainability, I've lost complete faith in the word. My eyes go straight to the back of my head every single time I hear it. This word sustainable, it does more harm than good now. And let's get something straight. Just because your product doesn't require a sea turtle to be drowned in gasoline, doesn't mean that your product is all of a sudden sustainable. You can't just look at a product as if it's in a vacuum. You have to look at the entire life cycle before you can determine if it's sustainable or good for the environment. Sustainability means that you're giving back to the world the same amount that you took from it. That's not that great. Regeneration, however, which is the third principle of the circular economy, means that you're giving more back to the world than what you originally took. One of my personal heroes, Toby Hemingway, he was an all-star in the world of permaculture. He described sustainability so well by saying, imagine if someone came up to you and said, "Hey bud, how's your marriage going?" And if all you have to say in reply is, it's sustainable, that's not really something you should be proud of. My point is that we can do so much better than sustainable, so why would you want it? And that's a fact that the circular economy completely understands. So if you're a tree hugger, great. If you're an entrepreneur who's trying to become a multimillionaire by 30, awesome. Environmentalism and capitalism, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have one with the other. Environmentalists have been pushing for sustainability for decades now, and businesses still refuse to pay a premium for quote-unquote sustainable practices. But in pursuit of sustainability, we have failed to find a common ground where environmental regeneration is actually at the core of business. That's the value of the circular economy. I think it's safe to say that it's time to retire sustainability and move to a structure that outperforms it in every way. And that structure is the circular economy. If you are struggling to figure out how you can begin to incorporate deconstruction services into your business, then you need to reach out to my friend Dave Bennick with the Building Deconstruction Institute. He and his team have not only been disassembling buildings around the world for the past 20 plus years, but they can also teach you and your team how to properly disassemble buildings as a source of revenue. If you need help and guidance, check out their website at www.reuseconsulting.com. So let's move on. Our guest on today's episode is Eric Corey Freed. Eric is first and foremost the top comedian in the architecture industry. For any of you who have had the pleasure to hear him speak, have experienced his artful combination of encouraging, data-packed insight with his crude yet charming sense of humor. Based in Portland, Eric is the Director of Sustainability for CannonDesign and has been a registered architect for over 30 years. He has contributed to the design of more than 40 LEED and net zero projects and has consulted on hundreds more. Eric was named one of the 10 most influential green architects in the entire world. And he's authored 12 books now, the last being our work together on the circular economy for dummies. Media outlets ranging from the New York Times, CNN, HGTV, Good Morning America, and now the Circular Economy Studio have included him in their shows to explore the ins and outs of sustainable design in the built environment. First of all, thanks for joining, Eric. I really do appreciate you taking the time. When I was organizing this first episode, I really couldn't think of a single better person to have involved to kick this whole project off, mostly because we've been tackling the circular economy together for a few years now. But what some people might not know is that we met at the Boston Architectural College, where we both now teach, and we wrote the Circular Economy for Dummies book together last year. But on top of all of that, you and I both now work at CannonDesign together.
God,
So,
you keep stalking me everywhere I go.
it kind of seems like it sometimes, doesn't it? But I think we've just really bonded over this idea that the circular economy is the structure that goes beyond sustainability. Sustainability really doesn't have a definition anymore, which is really unfortunate, but the circular economy is an idea that is well structured, has a goal, and can be easily implemented. But thinking about all of the arenas we've worked in together and all the projects we've worked on together, which has been your favorite so far?
What has been my favorite part of knowing you? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I think making you my joke punching bag. That's been a fun part of the time. No, I don't know. What do you mean? Here, it's funny because not that I want to give you praise at all, but I've been teaching for 20 years, 10 of it at the BAC now, and the great thing about the BAC is I got to meet a lot of really smart people that went through to get their graduate degree. I stay in close contact with a lot of my former students, as do you, I think now, right? You just
Right.
meet the best people there. And I was talking to another mutual friend of ours, Dan Overby, and we were talking about you. You don't know
Oh,
this. And I said, I don't quite get it because I've had a lot of students. I've had a lot of students say they want to collaborate with me. Um, you know, and my answer is always, yeah, great. Let's do it. And nothing comes of it. Right. They always end up dropping the ball or they end up dragging it out. I probably have 5 other former students, who went through the BAC or worked there or whatever, who they're like, yeah, I'm still working on that idea that we talked about. And they don't make any progress. And so Dan and I were talking about, well, what is it about Kyle that why is he able to do this? And I think it's because in part, you're very clear on what you want, which is quite a gift to have. Most people don't, and you're not afraid to do the work. I think when the book thing came out, it came from you saying, initially it started with, I think we should update the Green Building for Dummies book, right? That's how it started. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. That sounds like work. And you're like, no, it'll be easy and it'll be fun. It needs to be done. That book's from 2008. You need to update it, and I'll do all the work. I just, I think it's important. And so we
just put my name on it.
yeah. So I'm like, all right, if you'll do all the work, great. And then we reached out to Wiley.
Yep.
And we're like, hey, Wiley, we have a great idea. Let's update this. Let's update this book from 2008 that nobody's buying anymore. And they're like, yeah, no thanks. If you remember.
Right.
But then in the same breath, they said, but do you guys know anything about the circular economy? Because we do think there's a need for a circular economy book. And we're like, do we? Yeah, sure. So, the book kind of fell in our laps. And then it went from, and this is such, by the way, for everybody listening, this is how it typically works with Kyle. You think, oh, this will be great. I won't have to do any work, to, oh, now we have to produce a new book and I have to write half the chapters.
Yep.
So it went from me thinking this will be easy to, oh my gosh, this is just a ton of work that's going to consume a year of my life. Yep. So that's what happened.
Well, I mean, that was the goal all along, really. I mean, convince you to sign on to the project and then let reality slap you in the face later on. Well, and what was funny about all of these discussions taking place with Wiley was, and this is my absolute favorite story to tell about you, by the way, that you and I got accepted to speak at a conference together out in Spokane, Washington, about the circular economy, I think it was a week before they offered us this book opportunity. So I flew out from, well, I was living in Baltimore at the time, but I flew out the day before we were scheduled to speak, and you told me, hey, yeah, I'll be flying in late that night. So I'm finishing up the details of my slides, and then later, once you were supposed to get to the hotel, we'd combine them, run through it once, and then we'd be good for the morning slot. But, of course, I get a call from you at about 11 p.m. Pacific time, so 2 a.m. for my biological clock, saying that your flight was canceled and driving was really only your other option, which didn't make any sense at all because, let's face it, it was just an hour long presentation. So you end up sending me your slides, I combine them with mine, and then go present the whole deck the next morning on the circular economy. So I get up in the front of the room with all these people looking at me. Someone raised their hand, "Hey, where the hell's Eric? We didn't sign up for you."
See, and you were all mad at me too because my flight got canceled. But the other part of that story is, all right, I the next flight they put me on would get me in after our presentation, so there was no point in going. And then I
Right.
thought, well, it's like 5.5 hour drive to Spokane. If I leave now and drive through the night, I could make it. But then I'd be, of course, exhausted and dead on stage. And I'm like, how badly do I need to go there?
Well, and see, I am still suspicious that you never actually bought a flight to the conference.
I planned on going. I just didn't go. Yeah. Well, it's also the flight was like going to get me in at, midnight or something the
Yeah,
night
it was going to be a
before.
mess anyway.
It
So,
was gonna be a nightmare anyway. But I here's the thing: I speak at 50 conferences a year, or I did
right.
before COVID anyway. So I figure if I miss one or two, the my numbers are still good. My
There you
my
go.
average. If you're a person who only speaks at one or two conferences a year, it sounds like missing one's a big deal.
Right.
But if you're like a essentially climate change comedian like I am, and you're just on a different show every week, you're like, what's so I missed one.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to hold it against you. And like I said, it's my favorite story to tell, just because it was such a catastrophe for me at the time. I hadn't been speaking long at that point, so for me, it was like watching the end of the world unfold before my eyes. But everything worked out. We got the book deal soon after that. We published it at the beginning of last year, 2021, and it gave us something to do during the pandemic, which was great.
Well, not only that, I think that was where you really got to get close to our friends at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Was at that
Yes.
conference.
Right, that was when I first touched base with Rhaenyra O'Donnell. I think she left her card or something.
And let's face it, I would have messed that up. I totally, if I had been there in person, I would have said something obnoxious or stupid.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and Rainier, of course, would have, she loves me now, but my first impression is always the worst. It's it takes you got to warm up to me. You have to be forced to spend time with me in order to like me, is what I figured out. And so she would have hated me at the first impression, and they never would have agreed to work with us on the book or anything else since.
Right.
So
Yeah, and it all worked out. I mean, we didn't scare her away yet.
yeah.
The book really was an amazing opportunity, and definitely wasn't one that I ever expected to receive. We did get to learn from so many brilliant minds who are using the circular economy to eliminate waste in their own markets. Really could not have asked for a better way to get introduced to them all. So let's transition a bit into your work. How you found yourself where you are right now. You are the director of sustainability for one of the largest firms in the world, not the largest. I think we're at about 1,100 people right now. So tell us a little bit about how you slid your way into this role. And actually, I believe that you and I were in Boston at the time, right before you took the job. We were sitting at that little cafe across the street from the BAC, Sansi, I think it's called. And you had a meeting later that day with Mike Kavanaugh, who is also with us at CannonDesign. Am I remembering that right?
You're making it sound much more interesting. I think that, but yeah, I had a relationship with CannonDesign for a while, and Mike and I were friends, and Mike had me speak at Canon the year before, and I don't live in Boston. I live in Portland, Oregon. So I come out every semester to teach at BAC, and I had said to Mike, "Hey, I'm going to be in Boston. Um, if you want to grab a drink." And that was it. And Mike's like, "Oh my
Right.
God, perfect timing. I got to talk to you about something." And uh, the cafe across the street from BAC, Sanzi, is like one of my favorite places, and
Yep.
I make everybody meet me there because their food is so good, and they have this beautiful kind of sliding door patio that's right on the sidewalk and whatever,
Yeah, and it's like right there.
right there. And so yeah, you and I were chatting, and I probably told you about it. And then later that day, Mike and I had lunch, and then I don't know if you even know this story, but then Mike said, we're going through some changes at CannonDesign, and we're reworking like everything, and we're really thinking about what we want to be as a firm. We're 100 and whatever year old firm, and we're looking at the next century, and we've made a series of kind of acquisitions and whatever. And he's telling me this whole spiel, and I'm like, yeah. And I'll have the soup, please. Like that. That's kind of where my head was at. And he said, so we've created like this new role, this position, and I can't do it. I'm much more of a he's much more of a project manager type, was his
Right.
words. And he said, so we need somebody to do this. And I'm so dumb that I was like, oh, well, tell me what you're looking for. I probably know somebody. And he's like, you schmuck, I'm talking about you.
He's like, "Are you even paying attention? I'm talking about you."
Yeah. And I was like, oh, great. Uh, even better, because I already know me. But what he had laid out was interesting to me, in that, they were very much looking ahead. The joy of being 100-year-old firm means that, in a certain sense, you can have that luxury to kind of think about the
Sure.
next century. But even more importantly, they'd already made a series of acquisitions with bringing in Blue Cottage as a strategic consulting group, building out the Modular Design Plus group, because they
Right.
saw that was a big need in construction. The CannonDesign Builders piece. So they had set these pieces up, and what they were missing was a kind of a coherent sustainability thing. And the other part of it was that this sustainability role wouldn't be under marketing like most firms put, but rather that it would report directly to the core team and the CEO. And so we'd have a seat at the table. Sustainability would have a seat at the table. And that's what
Right.
was most interesting to me. At that point, I had already had dozens of conversations with other large firms about bringing me in. They wanted me to come, they thought it'd be a good idea to have me come in. And
Right.
at the end of the day, it always boiled down to how well, how billable are you going to be? How
Right.
much time are you going to spend on projects versus pursuits? And we would argue about it. And with Canon, they said, look, we just want you to do stuff and make stuff happen and make the firm better. And it'll they knew, and I knew, that it would lead to projects coming in and billable work and all that, but there wasn't that pressure. That I essentially They knew they needed a culture change, and I think that was the big difference, and it's why I ultimately chose Canon, and why I guess they chose me, because we were aligned like that. But yeah, that was 2-3 years ago now.
And your involvement seems to be working out really well so far. I can see the improvement firsthand, now having been on the team for close to a year now. But you're right, the fantastic thing about our sustainability team is we do get that spot at the table. Our team is getting invited to sit in on and sometimes even lead the discussions way up in pre design. So, transitioning a bit here, although I do work primarily in architecture, my background, which most people don't know actually, is mostly in chemistry, biology, and natural resource management. So, I do have some history with material and supply chain management. But you have been fully committed to the architecture industry for your entire career. So, I'm actually curious to know, has your involvement in the Circular Economy for Dummies book, which really was focused on material life cycles from a supply chain management perspective, Did your experience writing the book change the way you approach projects as an architect?
Yeah, I'm an architect. I'm not a supply chain expert. I'm not a material chemist. I'm not a biologist. I feel, by the way, that I'm saying those disclaimers more and more. Right? We're in front of a room full of doctors, and we're talking about how the building can affect the physiology of the patient. But I keep saying, but I'm not, hey, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist. Uh, how do I feel about it? Well, it's also, it's what's needed, right? The architect is the conductor, if you think about it. And so you need to have a basic understanding of all the different parts of the orchestra, but you also need to have an understanding of the audience, right? And of the acoustics of the concert hall
Right.
and of lighting to light your orchestra. And, so the, you end up being, an expert in nothing, but kind of have a little bit of knowledge about everything. And I feel, I feel that that's expanded to architecture as well, right?
Right.
Yes, architects need to know about materials and construction and assembly and cost and permitting and scheduling, but so too do we need to understand psychology and behavior and color theory and particulate matter and chemistry and biology and physics. And so to me it's all part of it. I'm not an expert in any of these things. I get excited about them. And so talking about the circular economy, I really look at it through a design lens. And I think that was the big breakthrough for me in writing the book, but also in wanting to incorporate it into all of our projects with all of our
Right.
clients. Was at the end of the day, circular economy is not about, hey, you should recycle more. In fact, recycling is one of the last things that we recommend you do, almost as a last resort, but rather, hey, this is a chance to redesign the world. And at the end of the day, I'm a designer. That's it. That's what's in my heart and soul. And so I love that. And if we're doing it by talking about supply chain, great. If
Mm-hmm.
we're doing it by talking about material chemistry, great. If we're doing it by talking about behavior, great. I'm interested in all those things as they are in service to having a truly restorative, regenerative world. So
Right.
to me, the circular economy is the framework we need to get there.
Well, and as the architect, like you were saying, you are the conductor of this orchestra, but I feel like the circular economy, because the idea is so fresh for a lot of individuals in the United States, it's not that you're just conducting a orchestra, you're giving them new music and then trying to have them go through it. So how do you begin to address the circular economy, or at least elevate it as a concept, when speaking to not only your clients but architects that you work with in and outside of CannonDesign, who have really no clue what the hell it is to begin with?
Yeah. Well, you already know this. As a sustainability person with been doing this for 30 years, I learned the hard way a long time ago. Look, I don't need to get everybody to speak my language. In fact, they're not going to, and I think that was a fundamental mistake that the modern sustainability movement made. Was, hey, let's get everybody to agree with us and to speak our language and learn all these new terms and considerations. That's just a really bad approach to how to get through something. And
Right.
so I don't need them to even utter the words circular economy, as long as they're able to talk about, do you realize that waste is costing you money? It's a liability on your balance sheet. Do you realize that there's a better way to redesign that out? Right? Do you realize that there are opportunities here that you're ignoring just because of what you're used to? And so that's much more exciting to me. I don't need the client to ever even say the word circular economy to me, and I
Right.
might not even ever say it to them, depending on who they are. We had this is a funny story, but we're working on a number of campus hospital, big scale things. And I was doing the sustainability kickoff workshop. You weren't in it with me because you're busy with other projects, but uh, but the team had warned me that, look, this guy is an old school guy. He doesn't know from sustainability. He's a Midwestern guy, and he knows what his business is, and he likes it that way. Okay. So I didn't talk to him about sustainability or circular economy or any of that stuff. Instead, I just talked to him
Right.
and I said, "What's your biggest headache every year?" And he said, "Snow plowing, the very unsexy act of snow plowing." He's in the Midwest. They get a lot of snow in the Midwest. And I said, "What do you spend on snow plowing?" And he said, "I don't even know. It's a lot. We have full time, we own plows and we have full-time people. And you look at their campus and it's 80% of it's parking lot. It's just,
Hmm.
there's a lot to plow." And I said, "Okay, well, you're thinking about investing $5 million to build a new central plant that's using 19th century technology. And that seems like a good idea for you because your last central plant lasted 80 years and that's the technology it used. We're going to boil steam and we're going to use that to blow hot air around the campus very inefficiently. You already know it'll work. You already know it'll be expensive, but at least you know it'll work. What if I told you that your biggest problem that you said was, which was plowing snow, what if I told you that I can solve both problems at once?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "We're going to use tubes filled with glycol, and we're going to stick other rods into the ground and heat up those tubes filled with glycol using a process called geothermal. And I'm going to create snowmelt zones across your entire campus. At the same time, we're going to take that preheated water and we're going to use that to heat and cool all of the buildings on the campus. You'll never have to plow any snow again, and your operating costs will be 80% less than what they are now."
And at this point, he's like, "Wait, who are you?"
Yeah, who are you? Who are you again? And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just Eric. What do you mean? I'm just
Yeah.
the sustainability guy." Yeah. So we didn't talk about lead. We didn't talk about sustainability. We didn't talk about circular economy. We talked about his problems and how I have a
Right.
solution to his problems. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. So that's a dumb anecdote, but it shows you how, I don't need them to suddenly become converts. That guy, you know, Midwestern guy that knows his business, who has never seen a solar panel in his life, that guy, I don't need to convert him to anything. I just need him to
Right.
say, here's the problem that I need solving. That's it.
No, that makes a ton of sense because there is a strong relationship between problems and innovation. You can't have innovation without a problem. So instead of just addressing innovation, oh, we can go waste free, we can introduce you to renewable energy, just focus on the problems that your client is experiencing. And then you're wide open to recommend all of the innovative technologies they have available to them.
Yeah.
So make sure you speak to the problems at hand and not just the innovations. Because we don't need people to know that they're even involved in a circular system at all. As long as the incentive is there, they don't care. I mean, their utility bill goes down. They avoid a carbon tax maybe. But whatever it is, at the end of the day, problems drive innovation, incentives drive action. So make sure you speak to the problems and not just the innovations they have available.
And here's the thing, I have a bit of an advantage on my side. And the advantage is that thanks to climate change, all of our current assumptions around the built environment are wrong, right? All of, most people like this guy, he's working on a set of assumptions that was true maybe in 1950.
Yeah, when you started.
Yeah, well, yeah. But now, because of what we call the brittleness bubble, all of those things are now liabilities. All of those things are at risk. And now if you expand that out to the entire supply chain of the building industry, not just
Right.
design, but production, manufacturing, distribution, consumption, repair, reuse, maintenance, all of those are at risk. And so they don't even realize it. They just think it's now business as usual.
Right.
We've seen this time and time again, right? There was I spoke at a conference. I don't even remember where, Iowa, I don't know. And then, after you speak, then they give you this kind of rubber chicken dinner. And so I'm
Yep.
sitting there like, eating my rubbery chicken dinner. And at the table, I'm like, "Hey, what do you guys do?" And the guy was telling me that he's a manufacturer of roofing products.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is going to be a long dinner." And I said, and instead of small talk, I was like, "So what's your biggest headache in your business?" And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't understand." I'm like, "Well, try me." And he said, "Okay, all of our products are made from chemicals. And I said, are they good chemicals? And he's like, no, they're pretty toxic, nasty stuff. Are they happy chemicals? No, they're real. They'll eat your face off chemicals. And I said, oh,
That'll
well,
kill you.
what's wrong with that? And he said, we buy them in advance. We put in orders for them in advance. And if the cost of oil goes down, it's great because now or if it goes up, I'm locked in at a low rate. But if the cost of oil
Right.
goes down, I've now locked in at a higher rate, and it gives me a lot of anxiety. It's one of the biggest stressors, but we have to order in bulk. And so basically the cost of a barrel of oil affects this guy's happiness.
Sounds like
And
good life.
yeah. And he said, so I don't know what to do about it. And I said, well, if all of your chemicals are oil-based chemicals, have you thought about using something else? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, there's a whole line of synthetic chemicals that are not petroleum based. You can do a whole series of bio-based stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, by switching him from a petroleum based, oil based chemistry to, in this case, a soy based chemistry, not only did it solve his big headache of buying things, but then he had this nice story of he's supporting farmers in Iowa, which he likes because they grow soy. So he's using local farmers.
Yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, instead of local oil. And then there were certain benefits to the chemistry. This was a closed cell foam. It had a higher R value. It was safer to work with. He had fewer OSHA standards. Like there was this whole like unraveling, but he had been so painted into a corner of this is the way the business is run with these oil-based chemicals that'll eat your face off. And you have to buy them in advance and their price is high and unpredictable and on and on and on. It never even occurred to him to ask the question. And all I feel like most of my job, especially in the circular economy, is I'm like a 5-year-old saying, well, what if you did something else? Like that doesn't sound fun.
All right, so let's put it in park for a second and actually talk about material issues in the industry. I think we would both agree that moving away from, the way things have always been done, that's a huge roadblock for a lot of architects. Even exploring new materials that we're unfamiliar with is a nightmare. There's risk involved, there's liability for the company, right? So to move away from petroleum-based materials, and I guess by that I really mean all finite materials, making that shift from linear to circular can seem pretty impossible at times. And you know as much as I do that really one of the materials that we continue to be a slave to is concrete. Like we cannot get away from cement for Christ's sake. But genuinely, it sometimes feels like there's absolutely no way around using concrete. And I don't care how much carbon you're planning on pumping into it, embedding CO2 in the material just offsets the inevitable problem of waste, right? It doesn't really solve anything and just prolongs the issue. Concrete itself accounts for 70% of all construction and demolition waste on any given site before any recycling effort takes place. So this is clearly an issue that needs to be resolved. The first principle of the circular economy, design out waste. I think it would be on my side about the fact that concrete has got to go.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine not building a building out of concrete. And in my past life, when I was doing just residential, we did this, right? I built houses out of concrete or without concrete. It took effort,
right?
But we built the walls out of straw bale or adobe. We built the floor out of stamped earth, which is really good. Basically, you just take dirt, you clean it and filter it, you bang it down, and then cover it with linseed oil, layers of linseed oil, and it gives a pretty durable floor. It's a very earthen way to build, and it's fun and fulfilling and makes for a very beautiful house. The trouble is it's not very scalable.
Right.
I can't build houses with earthen floors.
So you're telling me you're not going to be putting a dirt floor into a hospital anytime soon?
No, I mean, no, it'd be great. I mean, I'd be open to it, but I don't think the clients would. I don't think the clients would go for it. So building a building without concrete seems almost impossible. And so, okay, well, we can be less bad. So That's where you open up the whole world of SCMs and using fly ash in concrete. So take out some of the Portland cement, mix it with some other waste material. Maybe it's discarded rice hulls, maybe it's volcanic ash, maybe it's fly ash from a coal-fired power plant. But take some waste material, substitute it into the big chemistry set of concrete, and you can reduce a lot of the impact. Okay, well I did that for years.
So it's less bad, but still not eliminating the waste.
No, it's still not eliminating the waste. So then it becomes, what about something else? And now we're talking about, well, there's not one thing, but several things. So when we're talking about concrete, yes, we'll change out some of the Portland cement with a different chemistry, but yes, we'll also redesign for efficiency, so we don't need as thick of a beam or a floor. And yes,
Right.
we'll deliberately bake in voids using something like bubble deck, where we're lessening the mass and therefore the weight of the building. So that has other benefits. And then we're looking at
Mhm.
other admixtures like carbon cure or solidia, where they're injecting CO2 into it. So you're now using it as a carbon sink. Or then there's just, well, what if we just avoided it altogether by using something else like mass timber, where we're taking engineered lumber that's as strong as steel, and we're doing it for the beams and the columns and the joists and even the floor decking. And you get a very beautiful biophilic building at the same time.
Mhm.
And that part is going well. But for our, it works for an office building really well. It works for a
Yep.
university building really well. It doesn't work for hospitals that great yet because of the building code, but that's getting better too. So yeah, there's ways to do it, but it's very slow. And what I found is that I think we don't have the luxury of being slow anymore. I think
No.
because in the last 3 years, we've all felt climate change, and there's been a palpable change in people's perception of it. That we don't have the luxury to try out things. Like, we just need to do it. And so my mindset is changed heavily in that direction. In that, you know what, I don't have time for you to feel comfortable about this. I have to push you and
Right.
push myself, and we just really need to get there. So we're really pushing the clients harder and harder and harder, um, as I think is our duty and responsibility to.
Yeah, you're really spot on with that. I really do believe that anyone who wants to be involved in this transition from linear to circular is going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable at times, especially when exploring alternatives to concrete. And concrete has been fine for however long, so I'm sure there'll be quite a few people at the table that could be wondering, concrete's done the job, why the hell are we changing things now? But eventually, it's true, we're going to have to stop using concrete altogether. I mean, there are a bunch of different materials we can start to consider. I think steel, out of all of them, isn't really given enough credit because by using steel, we can develop a building structure that has the potential to last well over 100 years. And that's really tying into the second principle of the circular economy of keeping things in use for as long as possible. But I don't think we see the value in steel right now because it's assumed that a building only needs to last 30 years or so. But if we as architects and engineers and contractors start to make the adaptability and the flexibility of our spaces and designs over time a key criteria, then steel as a material would prove to be really beneficial. And I understand the concern, that it has a higher embodied carbon content than any other material. But by offsetting the need to purchase material in the future by using steel, we're really cutting down on the embodied carbon of the material over time. But look, I definitely understand that it's not easy to be uncomfortable and really push the limits. And it's not easy to know, especially if you're not familiar with the circular economy at all, it's hard to know how do I go about incorporating this framework into my own work. So for everyone listening in who is interested in using the circular economy as a resource, what is your advice to them? We all know that it's going to be uncomfortable, and there really are a lot of complexities involved in this type of work. So, what's your advice?
The easiest thing to do is just start asking the questions. That to me is always the most powerful thing. I play this exercise in my meetings where I do two major things, and I think it's good advice for everybody listening to do these same two things. Number one is I discovered that sustainability was always put at the end of the agenda. The project manager, they have a lot of concerns and worries and whatever. And so they would, they make their little agenda for the meeting, and like item number 8, sustainability.
Or 18.
Or 18, yeah. So change number 1 was you got to put sustainability first thing. And I think they initially thought it was because I have an ego or something about that. And
no, not you.
And I explained the reason we put sustainability at the top of the agenda is because it's the lens through which everything else falls. So if we talk about it up front, now every single thing after that, when we're talking about structure or the mechanical system or the siting or anything else, is now being framed through what I've already set up at the beginning.
Right.
So that was number 1. Number 2, big change, and this one's a little harder to implement, oddly enough, because people don't want to do this, but is, look, don't tell me what you think, right? We have a lot of people, experts, sitting around telling me what they think. I already kind of know what you think, because I think the same way you do. We've all been wired to think this way. Don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you wonder. So as we go around the meeting, I don't want to hear the mechanical engineer say, I think we should use this boring system that we've always used because it's safe.
Right.
That's usually what happens. Instead, tell me what you wonder. I wonder if we could use a system that uses half the energy. I wonder if we could use a system that costs less to operate. Let's move into wonder, and then that suddenly opens up possibilities for alternative systems, which is really what I want to set the stage for. So we're starting with sustainability, that becomes the lens, and now they're telling me the possibilities. And just those 2 changes alone really started to change the conversations we were having, which was great. And then the other easy things to do is fill your library with better materials, so that way you're likely to spec them and use them if you don't know where to start.
Right.
There's plenty. In fact, in my talks, I even give a list of manufacturers to start with, just to have their materials on hand. And then my favorite is just asking the questions, right? Of, well, what does this cost you every year? I don't know. Well, that seems like an important thing to know, doesn't it? So, the questions are the powerful thing. I remember Bertrand Russell's quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, most people look at the world and they ask why. I look at the world and ask why not.
Right.
Right. So, I think that's where you need to take it. Every person in sustainability is at their heart, for lack of a better word, an activist, because we've had to be.
Right.
Right. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. We certainly don't want to make them feel like they need to carry signs and picket and all that other stuff. But at our heart, we're change agents. We're activists. We're looking to change the status quo. And if you put sustainability as number 18 on the agenda, you're not changing anything. You're checking off a box. And I find you get that sweet spot with the client where you're solving a problem for them, and even especially if it's a problem that they didn't even know that they really had. Then you've changed their world, and that's exciting.
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, problems drive innovation. But it is difficult to innovate because there are so many people at the table when we're working on these projects that it has to become a collective effort if circularity or zero waste, if that's going to be leading the discussion. Which is why it's important to realize that each project member really does sort of have a different superpower, right? Architects have the power to design out waste from the very start and ensure that when the building does reach the end of its life, there's even a possibility for that building to be deconstructed rather than demolished. And that can be achieved through a whole range of strategies like modular design, even the material palette you choose. Contractors have a different superpower. Contractors can figure out how to take pieces of the building apart and find new uses for them, instead of simply throwing them out or breaking them down and recycling them. Our friend out west, Dave Benink, from the Building Deconstruction Institute, he's been doing this longer than I've been alive. I don't know if he'll appreciate me saying that actually, but it's true. But deconstruction does not mean that we're just removing every single nail and screw in the building. We're able to identify different sections or components of a building that can be harvested, for lack of a better word, and redirected somewhere else. And this highlights the key relationship between architects and contractors. If the building wasn't originally designed to be deconstructed, the contractor never has a chance. But if the contractors aren't able to deconstruct buildings, then why would architects originally design them to be deconstructed in the first place? Sort of a catch-22. And it's unfortunate that building deconstruction doesn't happen more often than it does, right? And not only that, but it's a shame that we continue to see building lifespans stay relatively small. I mean, they're pretty short when compared to all of those historic structures that, all of us drooled over in architecture school, like the Pantheon, all of those that have been around for centuries. Building life cycles now don't even compare. They're really short.
It's getting shorter too.
It's getting
That's it.
shorter.
It's funny. You mentioned Dave Bennick. Um, Dave's been doing this for almost 30 years, and we didn't call it the circular economy 30 years ago.
Right. No.
In 1992, we didn't even have that concept. He just, his interview is probably one of the most popular parts of the book. And as I've been, one of the cool parts of the book is, and I think you found this too, is that people have been calling me saying, hey, we need some experts for a circular economy panel. Who should we get?
Right.
And I've basically just been pulling from people that we interviewed for the book because there were so many great people.
Yeah, same.
And anytime I give Dave's name, he's always like a huge hit at these conferences. He's maybe because he's kind of an unassuming guy and he has a very powerful message. But in the book, I think he says every building is a potential material depot. Right. And that really stuck with me when he said that. He also was telling me that he's now been doing this long enough that he's been going into buildings and pulling out wood that has been used twice before. So this is now, he's reusing it for its third iteration. So this stud was a stud in this building, and now it'll be a stud in this other building. That's on the one hand, that's kind of crazy, but on the other hand, it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had another quote, because I think I said something like, well, you're a pioneer. And he said, I'm not a pioneer. I'm a revivalist, because I like to revive materials.
I like that.
Yeah. You should read the book that you wrote. He's in there.
I'll check it out. See if the library has it or something.
Yeah.
So as we wind down here, let's try and just focus on this idea of making an impact. Just getting shit done. Probably the biggest thing I've pulled from our experiences together is this fact that you don't need to be fully ready for something in order to start doing it. And sometimes it's actually better if you're not fully prepared, right?
It's funny, 30 years ago, I started getting interested in this thing called permaculture, which is it's a very niche aspect of sustainability, but the idea that you would grow your own food and was kind of early circular economy precursor.
Right.
And the man who kind of coined the term was this big Australian guy.
Bill Mollison, right?
Bill Mollison. Yeah. And he, and I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was living there at the time, and Bill came out. There's a big permaculture community there. It's very hippie out there. And Bill came out to speak, and we were all, everybody was very excited, and I got to meet him, and you shake his hands, and he was a big, massive guy. And when you shake his hands,
he's burly.
Yeah, it was like grabbing a bunch of bananas. That's how big his hands were. They were just big, massive, rough hands. And I said, Mr. Mollison, God, I'm so enamored with these ideas, and I just want to start, but I don't know where to begin. And I'm not an expert, and I was young. And he said in this big, thick Australian accent, and I'm not going to try to do it. But he said, just start. He was just very gruff. Just start. Just get out there. There's, just do it. Just get out there. You'll make mistakes. Who cares? Just start. And it always stuck with me. And anytime people ask me, where should I begin? I'm like, just get off your butt and start. Like, we got a lot of problems here. Like, I can't wait for you to feel perfect and comfortable. Just go out there and do it. There's a framework that we talk about in the book that we didn't create. You and I didn't create it. It's right. Part of circular economy, called the RESOLVE framework. And RESOLVE is an acronym for, let's see if I can remember: regenerate, share, optimize, loop, virtualize, and exchange. RESOLVE. And sustainability people love their frameworks, I know, but this framework has been really helpful because, you and I have both done this. We'll put it up as a slide in a workshop, and we'll say things like, okay, let's talk about the buildings on campus. Let's talk about the waste on campus. Let's talk about anything you want on the campus. And then we'll use this resolve framework to map it out. So if we're talking about, I don't know, the transportation on the campus, what does regenerative transportation look like? Well, that's walkability. That's maybe a bike sharing program. Maybe it's scooters if they're powered by renewable energy. Okay, what would a share program look like for transportation? Well, that would definitely be those shared scooters, those ride share carpools. Okay, which companies are doing a good job of that? What about optimizing transportation? Well, that's where we talk about linkages and connections and shuttle buses, networks. Where are people coming from? Where are they going to when they leave campus? Coordinating that with class schedules. As we go deeper in the resolve framework, what about loops? Well, that's where we could reuse things. We could collect biodiesel from the restaurant on campus or the campus cafeteria. We could grow food near the transportation hub, so where people are getting off, there's something to eat or something to do or something, right? We could have bike repair stations. If we're going to build out a bike share program, we need a bike repair. So that's where we could start looping these. What about virtualizing? How do you dematerialize these things? Well, we could have carpool programs or remote hybrid programs or classes. We can move a lot of the library online. Why are they coming to campus? Just to go to the library? Well, we could change that. And what about exchange? What could you do for that last part of exchange? Well, depending on where people are coming from, maybe that starts to map out where a satellite campus could be or a pop-up campus. Or we could, switching gears, we could think about a textbook rental program. So we're using this resolve framework. We're just going through and asking the questions to a room full of educators and administrators who are full of ideas. Right? There are no shortage of ideas. They just haven't been asked the right questions. And so that to me is the most powerful part, right? Take these frameworks, use them, and just ask the questions. Right. Will it be perfect? No. But as Mr. Mullison told me 30 years ago, just start, just do it.
Yeah, without a doubt. Sometimes just starting is the best thing you can do. And you and I both have seen a lot of success come from simply handing someone a prompt and asking for their input. We don't need to necessarily be the main contributor to a conversation. We just need to facilitate it.
I think there's always this mindset of, well, you're the expert. You tell us what to do. And, look, I'm happy to do that. In fact, I'm happy to tell you, I'm happy to dictate everything about your life. What you should wear, what you should eat. I'm happy to totally control everything. But it's not going to work, right? You need to feel ownership in these ideas. So when we go through this workshop process and we just run through the resolve framework and it's their ideas they're shouting out, well, they're going to have such an invested emotional connection to those ideas. They're going to want to see them through much better than if I said, you should have a bike share program. Right. So it's part of the psychology. Maybe it's the manipulation, whatever you want to call it. But it's at the end of the day, we're as consultants, we're coming in and we're not handing you a plan. We're helping facilitate you creating the plan. Really. And so whether you're talking about waste or carbon or energy or just general sustainability, if we're giving you an action plan, you have to author it. And so that's where these frameworks really come in handy.
And if you do have a copy of the book, it's in there somewhere. I think chapter 16 or something.
I think we mentioned it like 75 times throughout the book anyway.
At least.
So that is officially it. We have reached the end of the very first episode of Don't Call It Sustainable. So thank you so much, Eric, for joining. Like I said earlier, I really could not think of a better person to bring on to start this new adventure of mine. And even though I don't think that it'll be perfect, like you've always said, it doesn't need to be perfect to get started. So thank you again for joining. Thank you for your insight. Your contributions everywhere are very much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, great. Well, this is fun, and hopefully this is useful to people.
To listen to even more episodes of the Don't Call It Sustainable podcast, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Also, follow us on Instagram at Don't Call It Pod. To learn more about our work at the Circular Economy Studio, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at circulareconomy.studio. For sponsorship opportunities or questions, email us directly at info@circulareconomy.studio.